And welcome to a new episode of a Dynasty Mind. My name is Chris Chung. This is a feature of Fake Pigskin. This is the Dynasty Mind, and tonight I have the pleasure of digging into the Dynasty Mind of Doug Green. Doug, how are you doing tonight?
Good, Chris. Good to see you.
Awesome. So thank you so much. I've been going through this series of helping people think IDP, think about Dynasty in a sense, and I think the defensive position has often been too, left behind. People are way focused more on the skill position, but when you get into a league that discusses the larger teams, you get to play everyone. I think that was much more fun. So tell us, how did you get involved with Dynasty football? How did you get involved with IDP?
So that is a really long kind of winding story. So I actually got into Dynasty football through Dynasty baseball. I grew up loving baseball. There was a guy who lived across the street from me, had a couple of sons that were really into baseball. They wanted to do their own little family fantasy baseball league, and they basically needed another person to kind of round out a four-man league. So they asked me if I was interested. I said, sure. Next thing you know, I'm addicted to this stuff. I'm keeping my own stats out of the newspaper. That's how old I am. I was doing all the stuff manually out of the newspaper, hand typing all this stuff. Advent of the internet and technology, everything makes that much easier to do online nowadays. So when that came about, I dabbled in fantasy baseball, fantasy football, fantasy basketball for a little bit. Have settled kind of on fantasy football now. Once I got into that, I try everything. I want to experience everything. I want to see what's all available to me. So I got into different things. I started with the Dynasty League. There was a home league that one of my friends, actually DJ Jarvis, who writes for Fake Pigskin for you guys, he actually got me into that. We were in the league. We were doing a draft, and somebody mentioned that they didn't want to draft the Vikings defense. They just wanted Jaron Allen. And I was like, well, why can't we do that? And so I started doing some digging into it, found out that IDP leagues were actually a thing, and you could actually do that. So that kind of piqued my interest. I got into that, started, researching it, trying to find free leagues to play in. So so that I can find things that, ways to explore it without like costing myself a ton of money. So I could kind of get a feel for what was going on. And when I got into there, what I discovered was, at least at that point, IDP wasn't getting a lot of love. You had a hard time finding resources about it. People weren't writing about it. People weren't talking about it. You could find, like, there may be a section in a draft guide from 2 years previous that talked about, and they talked about this guy or that guy. But basically, they all kind of laid down the same rules of linebackers are king, and basically kind of wait on everything else. Was basically kind of the draft knowledge that you could find out there. And I was like, well, we can do better than that. So I started my own blog, started kind of digging into it, went through it, attacked it just kind of the way I did everything. I was still writing for the newspaper at the local newspaper at that point. So I kind of attacked it just like I would any other series or any other story. Kind of dug into it, trying to find things that I could find, facts and figures, and get kind of the feel of the thing. Managed to happen to see an opening at DLF. I applied. They were kind enough to bring me on. Olinger and Steve Wieremski took me under their wing, helped me out, got me up and running. From there, they both kind of moved on onto different things. Both have left now, unfortunately. And through a war of attrition, if nothing else, I've ended up as the DLF team lead. Maybe because nobody else wanted the job, I'm not sure. But so that's kind of how I got to be where I am. Like I said, it's kind of a long and involved way. It was definitely not the direct route to get here, but here we are.
Well, we are definitely glad to have you there as the DLF face of the DLF IDP section. You got some very great colleagues. I've had the chance to talk to two of them. B, who was also from our team. I think he's still listed as part of our team in the SFB anyways. And Adam, Adam TZ. He's in a league of mine. He's actually in my, I would call it, steal someone else's word, my flagship league, my dynasty league that I've been involved with the longest, and he's there now. And definitely, you've got some great people on your team, and they're continuing to pump out great content. So, when we can dig into your mind, let us talk about your sense. How was it this year? How what is your sense of the rookies of this class, and what are some of your thoughts about coming into the 2018 with the new changes in players, in teams, and all of that?
So I think if we're taking a look at this rookie class, both on the offensive and defensive side, I think there's a lot of similarities on both sides of the football. Just the fact that there are some like clear guys at the top, then there's like a significant tier break, and then there's like another group of guys, and then there's like kind of everybody else. You can say that about wide receivers, and you can say that about linebackers. Same thing with like say tight ends, where there's a couple of really good guys at the top that maybe didn't grab like really good landing spots, and you can kind of say that about the defensive ends as well. There were a couple of decent guys, and then there were a couple of guys that didn't really land where you kind of wanted them to. And then, then there was the quarterback situation where a lot of those guys went where you wanted them to go, and then you've got like a safety like Derwin James who landed in a really great spot for him. So there was a lot of similarities kind of between the two. I've always been kind of a big draft fan, so I always watch all 3 days with great interest, just to kind of see kind of how the chips fall, especially with IDP. That landing spot makes such a big difference. Just for example, right at the top of the draft with Bradley Chubb, he goes to Indianapolis. He's playing a 4-3 defensive end, and he honestly, if he is not your number 3 overall IDP pick, he's probably number 4. Instead, he goes to Denver, which runs a 3-4 defense, which makes him an outside linebacker, which significantly caps his value. And all of a sudden, he goes from being one of the first IDPs off the board to somewhere in the middle of the range. I mean, it's that kind of a drastic shift. I've done probably 3 or 4 rookie drafts now, not counting mock drafts. He's gone in the 4th, 5th, maybe. That's probably the earliest I've seen him go in like a 12-team league. A couple of them are 16-teamers, but that's going to be about as early as I've seen him go. And that can really kind of show you that kind of shift where on the offensive side, the guys don't really have that. You're a wide receiver, you're a wide receiver. If you go to Baltimore, or you go to Chicago, or you go to Miami, it doesn't really affect your value too much unless you go to someplace they've just got like a ton of wide receivers. But for the most part, you're going to go in, you're going to get snaps, and you're going to get catches. Not necessarily so on the IDP side, where your landing spot and those fits can really make a big deal.
Absolutely. I think you bring in a good point that we have to actually pay attention to the position designation. We don't want to consider, not all leagues consider all defensive linemen the same, and we're talking about those edge rushers. Some might be converted to linebacker, or some might be the defensive end, depending on where they land and where they fall. Now, you brought up Bradley Chubb, and the first thought that came to my mind when he was drafted by Denver is, are we going to get a similar situation that of Von Miller for a couple of years ago? He was a big-time edge rusher, and I wanted him to fall into a defensive end, but he was a outside linebacker for all of his career up until now, and he's good, but did it cap his upside? Is it a similar situation we're finding with Bradley Chubb?
Yeah, that's a very good parallel since they ended up both really on the same team. That Von Miller, he's really, really great. He's everything that you would want, but he is better as a real-life football player than he will be as an IDP asset, and that's just the cold, hard truth of playing an outside pass rusher, or an outside linebacking pass rusher.
Yeah.
If he's a defensive end, you slide him down into a 4-3. He's got a lot of value because he's going to pick up extra runs, run tackles there. But as an outside linebacker in a 3-4, not as much.
So those are some of the things that we have to pay attention to. If you're new to the IDP realm, for those who are already involved, you know who to look out for. It's just not the name guys. We really have to pay attention to their role, and especially to the scheme fit and how they're being used. Now, let's jump into talking about IDP in general. What is your thought on the state of IDP in general that's being brought out now? The variety of scoring between like tackle heavy or big play only. And what is your preferred IDP scoring style or scoring format?
I personally like them as crazy as they come. I like to play, and personally, I like to play in defensive tackle required leagues. Defensive tackle is my favorite position to scout if that tells you exactly how crazy that I am. So I love watching those big ugly guys in the middle. So I want to play in a league where honestly that gives me the advantage, that I generally think that I know more than the next guy about defensive tackles. So those are the leagues that I would like to play in. On the backside though, and we're going to talk about cornerbacks later, spoilers, but I'm not as crazy about cornerbacks. So I will generally look for leagues that just give you the defensive back designation, which means I don't have to really necessarily worry about cornerbacks. I can just kind of load up on safeties. But if I am playing in a league that is cornerback required, in fact, the DLF staff league, the staff IDP league, it is a cornerback required league. So you've got to make your moves there. So you got to kind of take that into consideration. But for me, I know some folks like the no player left behind leagues. I really just kind of like to try and all kinds of crazy scoring. That's kind of the fun part for me, is just trying to try different things out. So I'm not overly concerned. I'm not going to turn down a league because it's a big play versus a tackle heavy or vice versa. If it's got a good kind of decent scoring settings, good scoring settings, and a fun group of guys to play with, that's really kind of what I'm after in my leagues.
Awesome. And you are the third person who mentions this no player left behind league. I hope it's growing. I hope the community knows about it, and we should probably promote it some more. You guys can find the link to the scoring type in my previous videos in the YouTube section. I might just add it as well to this YouTube video. But that seems like an ideal scoring because of the way it balances out the importance and the value of defensive player with those of offensive skill player. Although we are still very much familiar with how to value offensive player, when it comes to IDP, sometimes we are at a loss because this is a fairly new format and a fairly new way of scouting, analyzing, and preparing ourselves to find the best player. So when we're thinking about playing as an IDP player, what is one misconception that you frequently can continually hear across, in the Twitterverse or from league mates who are new to the IDP game?
The one thing that I hear from folks that are reluctant to get into it is they will say, there's so much that I have to learn to get into IDP, and I don't want to have to take that time to invest in that. I played redraft for years. I know all those players. Transitioning over to Dynasty is not that big of a leap for them because they're basically just taking their same guys and just keeping them year after year. So for them, a jump between redraft and Dynasty isn't that big of a deal. Adding on to them seems like a major leap, but it's really not. I try to express this to people. I compare it to, if you already speak Spanish, Italian's not that much farther off. It's really kind of that way. You're already playing fantasy football. If you're already playing dynasty football, you're already comfortable trading draft picks. You're already comfortable maintaining a roster in an off season. You already know how to set a lineup. All you're doing is just adding in another batch of names. It's really what it boils down to. Yeah, the scoring settings might not be universal, but my work league is completely different than the Scott Fish Bowl. The league settings will always change. I mean, yes, there are some very, almost everybody plays PPR nowadays, but there are tweaks and changes beyond that, league to league, and IDP is exactly the same way. It's a few extra names that you got to keep track of. There's no getting around that. But once you get into it, you're going to find that it's much more fun. And it brings more enjoyment to the game when you're watching it live as well. When you're watching your team play on Sunday, do you just get up and leave when they're on defense? No. You sit there and you're cheering for sacks, and you're cheering for interceptions, and you're cheering for fumble recoveries. So you might as well go ahead and do the same thing, only with your fantasy team, again, to give you that kind of that little extra boost or that little extra oomph. So people always say it's hard to get into, but I always find you just need to make kind of that one little extra step.
Absolutely. I think you put it in a great point. Is people already have that frame, that schema, and all they have to do is shift it and learn new names, learn a new system, but the transition isn't as daunting as people might think. And of course, I had an amazing time cheering on when Ray Lewis was on my team, when Brian Urlacher was on my team. Definitely loving those interceptions. Those give you the same type of euphoria as when a player maybe catches a 50-yard reception, and you get the same amount of excitement just watching that. So that brings up a great point. Now, we're transitioning to talking about one of the strangest position, I would have to say, in IDP and all of fantasy football. We are very typically, there's a great correlation between well-known players and their production. But when it comes to cornerback, we are really heading into a interesting territory where the big name guys in the past, like Darrelle Revis or Xavier Rhodes, those might not be the guys that you want. So can you tell us a little bit about the cornerback position and how to properly prepare ourselves to find the best guys for our team?
Actually, Revis nowadays might actually be somebody that you'd want to pick up and use. So basically, the way that that cornerback kind of scoring works, it's almost the inverse of the way that the rest of fantasy football works. Like you said, normally your best players give you the best production, they give you the best numbers. For cornerbacks, though, it's the opposite. Because you're the best player, I'm Richard Sherman, I'm locking down one side of the field. They're not even throwing my way. Well, if they're not throwing my way, I'm not catching interceptions, I'm not breaking up passes, I'm not returning fumbles, any of that stuff, so I don't have a chance at numbers. I don't have the opportunity. So cornerbacks, you actually want, I don't want to say the bad guys, but you want the guys that are kind of the next tier or the 2 tiers down. You want the cornerbacks that teams are not afraid to throw at, so they'll get opportunities for interceptions and fumbles and pass breakups and those types of things. But you don't want them so terrible that they're going to just get torched every time out, because that's no fun either. I actually believe in cornerback required leagues, the best players to own, honestly, are rookies, and especially that first half of their rookie season. I'll go heavy with the rookies, because that's when teams want to test them out. They want to see just how good this guy is. And so you may end up stealing a couple extra interceptions that way, because teams are going to say, all right, let's see what this kid can do. He picks off the pass and returns it, 50 yards for a touchdown, for a pick six. That's kind of the thing that you're looking for. Once they get in the back half of the season and there's some tape on them, then that becomes a little bit harder. Then you need to be at that point. Then that's usually when I'll kind of shift gears. That's when I'll start scouting the waiver wire, looking for guys who maybe have, been picked on a little bit more. Maybe are going into kind of a pass heavy stretch of their schedule that I can kind of grab those corners and get some production out of them going that way.
So you bring up 2 great points with these cornerbacks. The rookies, they do get picked on a lot. They get tested. People want to know if they can hang in the NFL, and of course that means volume. That means more opportunities for something to happen. Now, when you talk about scouting the waiver wire, let me start there. What are some of the things that you have to factor into your mind? Like, how do I know which player is worth picking up on a waiver wire?
Sure. So this is the other kind of thing that people will generally balk at when it comes to playing IDP. Is on the offensive side, you can really just kind of go to the waiver wire, sort by points scored, and you can kind of make your waiver decisions or your roster decisions based upon that. On the IDP side, you really can't, especially for cornerbacks. Guy might have, all of his scoring may have come in 1 week. You really have to kind of do some upcoming schedule's a big thing. You got to see who they're playing. If you think that they're going to win or lose, if you think that they're going to win their next 4 games and they're going to be ahead, that means, if you think they're going to lose their next 4 games, you think that that the other team is going to be ahead and they're going to run more. You don't want to pick up that cornerback, because then then he's again not going to have as many opportunities for passes coming his way. So you have to kind of factor those things in there as well. Again, if they're coming up on a run of bad quarterbacks, if they play, I don't know, Cleveland and whoever was backing up Deshaun Watson last year, and just they're going through a run of bad quarterbacks, and that guy's sitting on the on the waiver wire, that's the guy that I'm kind of targeting. So it just kind of depends. Again, you can't just blindly pick these things. A lot of these, there's that extra level of thought that has to go into these, especially for cornerbacks. You have to play the matchups. You can almost take what the offensive guys do. You can hear them, all them talking about the wide receiver guys are, well, this guy's going to have a big week, or this guy may not have a big week this week. You actually want to take that information again and flip it on its head. Use what the ESPNs and the DLFs and the fake pigskins are telling you on a week-to-week basis for the redrafts, for those matchups. And the guys that they're to the wide receivers that they're telling you to avoid, the cornerback that they're facing, that's the guy you want to start, because they're saying this guy's got a bad matchup, the cornerback's going to play well. So that's the guy you want to make sure that you have in your lineup, or that's the guy you want to make sure that you're picking up off the waiver wire.
Awesome. So those are the things that I'll apply to my process, because, again, this is a very streamable positions. We're familiar with the term streaming because I do it in redraft. I do it sometimes in Dynasty, depending on the waiver setting. And tight ends are very streamable, per se. The third wide receiver is very streamable. Cornerback seems to be the most streamable of all the positions we're putting together. So we do need a process knowing what to look out for. And I'm sure you guys at DLF and we try our best to at Fake Pigskin also to just provide you with that information, so you don't have to do all the little work, but we give you a guide. We give you some of the numbers to break it down, some of the things to look out for that. Having that said, when is it a time that a corner is worth keeping in a dynasty sense?
Ooh, that's a good question. Honestly, I know there are some, and I can't remember whether it was Olinger or whether it was Wyremski, but one of them told me that they never keep a corner year to year. They pretty much, as you're moving through your roster requirements in the offseason, they would dump all of their cornerbacks and fill those up with other players. A lot of times offensive players, those high level, those boom bust kind of guys that they want to take, that they want to roll the dice on, they'll dump their cornerbacks for those guys, hoping that one of those guys break out in a mini camp or in an OTA or something like that, or try and get a little extra trade value or a little extra juice out of those if they manage to, if something big around them happens to go down. So unless it is somebody that I totally am in love with at the cornerback position, and I don't know if I maybe Jalen Ramsey. Jalen Ramsey would probably be the guy that I would say year over year I would keep on my roster. Just about anybody else I would probably turn loose. Marcus Peters would be a borderline call for me. I would have to see what I would be giving up to get to keep him on my roster. If I was picking up, I would say probably if I had a chance at a high level running back or something like that, somebody who's going to get a cushy running back job, at that point I might go ahead and dump him for that. That one is probably a coin flip kind of call. But I mean, at that point, I mean, that's the kind of stuff that we're talking about. Is they're all kind of paper thin choices like that. Everything, pretty much anybody else that you care to name, I'm probably throwing them back for, like I said, a dice roll, an offensive guy, a draft pick, a roster slot if I think I need to maintain one. Anything like that. If you play in a salary cap league, if you need the cap flexibility, usually the corners are going to be. Just because, like you said, there's a lot of people don't invest heavily in them, so they're a cheap, easy cut. Off they go. Bring in the next guy that you think might have a chance. So I wouldn't do a lot of keeping of those guys, with the exception of maybe a very small list.
Excellent, and that's helpful to know that don't overpay for a cornerback, especially when they're offered your trade. You have to think twice. Is this cornerback worth keeping? Is this worth giving up value for? Most of the times, the answer is going to be no, unless they're outstanding, unless they're special. I know I had Marcus Peters for 2 years, and then I managed to trade him off. He was a good cornerback for a couple of years, so I don't mind that. He was a usable asset above the rest. But in general, I would typically agree with you. My stance has been, unless I am forced to keep him because cutting him will hurt my salary cap, I'm trying to stream this position as much as I can. Okay, so let's move back, looking into a more bigger global picture. How do you see the 2018 season for IDP? What are some trends you're seeing that might be helpful for us to start paying attention to?
One of the things, at least when I'm going through my rookie drafts, is I think that there are like I said before, there are clear tier breaks. And if I'm not getting the guys in the first couple of tiers, I'm pretty much jettisoning my draft picks from that point on. I think I tweeted last week, maybe the week before. I was in a rookie draft. That was an IDP league. I have not made a selection after the fourth round in any rookie draft this year. Pretty much there is a clear tier break at defensive end, linebacker, and safety. And once it gets past those, I would call them maybe a dozen guys, I'm getting out, trading those picks for picks next year, trading them for, upside potential kind of guys. Just because I think that there's kind of a clear tier break with there. If you play in a defensive tackle required league, there is a little bit more depth with those. To me, there was only a couple of really kind of high-end guys with those. One of those being Maurice Hurst, who ended up having the heart condition pop up during the combine. So his value got knocked way down. And so he's, to me, is a bit of a dice roll. If you believe in him, he's a guy you want to target. But if you're leery in any way, shape, or form about that heart condition, you got to let him go, because if something bad happens, then you could be out a significant draft pick, and you don't want to do that. So he's one of those guys that could go kind of either way. But in terms of draft strategy for me, like I said, I've got a clear set of a dozen, maybe 18 guys, and if they're not on that list, I'm getting out after that.
Excellent. So that gives you a sort of sense of who are worth picking, and seems like it's you'll rather take the chance on next year's class, and perhaps that is a much better class to take a chance on when you're looking to fill some of the holes. So speaking about that, one of the things that I have not heard throughout the Twitter sphere, or even in a lot of talks in the circles of IDP, is how to prepare for next year. How do we know what the strength the rookie class is for next year in terms of looking at the defensive player? So can you give us a little preview of what you saw for the 2019 class, and how we can just position ourselves to have the best success in drafting the best rookies?
Word on the street is next year's draft is going to be very defensive line heavy, especially at the defensive tackle. So if you are in a defensive tackle required league, this is the year that you've been waiting for. Ed Oliver out of Houston is, as of today, if you had to hold the 2019 NFL draft today, Ed Oliver was probably going to be your number one overall draft pick. He is a defensive tackle out of Houston. Big man and can really move down there. Very much an Aaron Donald, Geno Atkins type body. So people are kind of touting him as kind of the face of that defensive side. But there are a bunch of defensive guys that are coming down there. In terms of defensive tackles, like I said, Ed Oliver, Rashawn Gary from Michigan, Dexter Lawrence from Clemson. That Clemson defensive line is just full of nasty guys that are all going to be some level of first round picks. Linebackers is your bread and butter, and there's probably a good half dozen guys that could go anywhere in those first couple of rounds. Devin White's really kind of the big name that everybody talks about, an outside linebacker from LSU. There is another Josh Allen from Kentucky. He's a pass rush specialist that you may see go early. And then there's a couple of Alabama guys, because there's always a couple of Alabama guys that'll be there. And then on the defensive ends, like we said, there's a couple of guys from Clemson in Christian Wilkins and Cleveland Farrell. And then Joey Bosa's little brother, Nick Bosa, is another name that everybody is talking about that you'll see at the top of the draft. Maybe just as good as Joey, which is really kind of scary to think about. So those are just some of the names that are kind of floating out there that could be potentially somewhere in that first, second round kind of nebulous situation. In terms of how I prepare for the upcoming seasons, honestly, names on a spreadsheet. If you could see this here, I'm just kind of switching between screens on my own computer, just kind of sliding back and forth. I keep a spreadsheet of basically every name that I come across in a draft guide that somebody talks about on a podcast that they bring up on Path to the Draft, around the NFL, ESPN, wherever. If they say this is somebody who to keep an eye on for next season, they go on the spreadsheet. I put in there their uniform number. To me is big, especially for defensive backs or defensive linemen, because sometimes you can't tell, and you need to be able to identify them. So I always make sure that I have the uniform number, and then the heights and weights. I'm not a big height, weight, speed guy. I am not a numbers cruncher. I look at the tape, or I look at the game, and I grade based upon grades. I'm not a guy to plug in numbers into a spreadsheet and get back a result. I value those pieces of information. I value the folks that can do that. That is just not my style. But yeah, for me, I just keep a list of names that I try and keep a watch on. If you get to the games early on, right when the game starts, so here in Central Time Zone, 11 o'clock, those 11 o'clock Saturday kickoffs, they will almost always highlight like two offensive guys and a defensive guy. Whoever the defensive star is, that's the guy that you want to put on your spreadsheet, because that's the guy they're going to talk about. He's the most likely guy to get a sack, pick off a pass, something like that. So that's kind of where I kind of build my list of names from. And then from there, as they declare, I move them into a separate spreadsheet of, okay, here's all the draft eligible guys. Now I go through and I grade them and I rank them from that point.
Awesome. That's one of the ways that I prepare myself too, whether it's offensive side or defensive side of the football. And I think you bring up such great insight and advice for all those who wants to try out IDP or want to get better at IDP, because we want to enjoy both aspects, both sides of the football. We want to watch those players produce well for our team. Doug, thank you so much for joining me tonight. Thank you for allowing me to peek inside your Dynasty Mind. Tell us where we can find your work, what you have in store for us upcoming, and where we can find you or contact you.
Sure. So all my work is on dynastyleaguefootball.com. That is where I work. As you mentioned, I do have an amazing crew of IDP guys that I work with, and I want to give them all a shout out. I try to do that on every podcast. So FF Ghost, Tom Kislingberry, Adam Sticky Kazikas, our boy B, Bo Brewington. I don't think I'm missing. Oh, Travis May. See, I always forget Travis.
It's okay.
Yeah, I've got a tremendous group of guys. They're all super smart, and that's what the fun part about it is that if one of us doesn't know something, somebody else generally does, and our talents really kind of blend and mix really well together. So that's what makes our group such a strong unit. In terms of upcoming work, I have got a couple of pieces coming out in the next couple of weeks. The standard winners and losers stuff from the draft. We're still chugging through those over there, and then we're going to have I'll have a couple of rookie profiles coming out from there. And then to get a hold of me, Twitter's the easiest way, to be quite honest. I'm just at Big Board IDP on Twitter. I'm always happy to chat with folks about anything you really want to talk about. Obviously IDP, but I'm willing to talk rookie drafts, drafting, grilling the Cubs, whatever you want to talk about. I'm usually up for it.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Doug. And people, if you want to reach out to them, you can always contact me as well at FF Dynasty 101. I can get you plugged in, get you digging into these guys' Dynasty Mind. Thank you so much for joining me. Thank you for being part of our show. Have a great night.